We are excited to welcome, I think for the fourth time to the Canadian Baseball Network podcast, MLB.com Blue Jays beat reporter Keegan Matheson. Keegan, how's it going?
I'm doing very well. Happy to be back. You guys can't shake me. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
hey, good guess. We just keep bringing him back, I guess.
Yeah, I like it.
We'll go with that. Obviously, we want to talk a little bit about the winter meetings that just passed and Blue Jays stuff. But before we get into too much specifics, being on the ground at the winter meetings, what was the general feel around the Blue Jays, whether it be from other reporters or other front office executives, that sort of thing? Because there's a lot of talk about the Jays really love to finish runner-up on a lot of free agents, it seems like.
They do. It's very Canadian, and in my most East Coast hater voice, I say it's very Toronto. Just happy to be mentioned in the same sentence as the city of New York, but that's about it. It's the winter meetings for people who have not been there, and I'm so happy for those of you who have not. These take place in hotel and conference hotels that are much larger and hold more people than where I grew up. It is, I think, last year in Nashville, this year in Dallas, Texas. For example, the Rule 5 draft took place in a room that was so big that when I went into it, I started feeling sick. Like it was, you could have 10 airplanes in this one room, and that's only 1% of this hotel complex. It is mind-boggling how big these places are. Every square inch of these locations are filled with very similar looking men wearing very similar outfits with a very similar kind of nervous energy about them. It is professionally my place, socially maybe not my place, though MLB winter meetings. I think that's a polite way to put it. And thankfully I can keep myself kind of quarantined off to the media workroom, which is a big, beautiful ballroom with a billion tables. And I can sit there and sip my coffee and look busy for 7 out of the 8 hours a day until I actually have to do some work. There's a lot of eyewash. There's a lot of fake hustle at the winter meetings, but it's still, even though everything happens, via text and calls now, it's still a very important place to be because it acts as a bit of a launching point for the rest of the offseason, especially with how slowly off seasons tend to move now. I think last year with Ohtani, this year with Soto, we're seeing a bit of a renaissance of the winter meetings, which I like. I remember my first winter meetings, 2018, 2019. I flew to Las Vegas, and all I covered was them releasing Troy Tulowitzki. Sometimes you make these trips, and it's a waste of everyone's time. These last couple winter meetings have been fun as hell and interesting. When I do allow myself to step outside of the safe space of the media workroom. Once a day, we will go up to a suite that Ross Atkins and the Blue Jays use for their meetings. I always enjoy how the whiteboard has been so meticulously scrubbed in that meeting room. Big whiteboard, and you can tell that they've used the alcohol rubbing. You can't even shine a flashlight on it to see the words SOTO written out.
Did you try?
There's no signs. What's that?
Did you try? Did you bust out your
I
iPhone?
absolutely did because the sun was coming in. I saw a whiteboard. Let me tilt my head, get a couple of angles here. No, it was they must have hired a crime scene cleanup crew every time before the filthy media rolled in. But once a day we would meet with Ross Atkins and speak with him about what the Blue Jays are doing. And then the first day on Monday, we meet with John Schneider. And then a tradition on the last day of the winter meetings is always the 8 a.m. managers breakfast, where the managers sit with the media on each beat in each city, really preparing John Schneider for spring training, which is just seeing my face at 8 a.m. every damn day, which has to be thrilling for a manager of an MLB team. But when we step outside of all of that, outside of the experience, a lot of the chatter, what you hear is, frankly, outside of me and the 3 or 4 other Canadian reporters there, everyone's American. So that's a certain view of Canada's baseball team. The American view of the Blue Jays does tend to align a little bit more with what you hear from angry reply guys on Twitter of just, the Jays come second on everybody. They this, they that. And there is an element of truth to all of that. But that tends to get parroted over and over. And the further I am into this industry, and I'll say it carefully, the word sources can mean a lot of things. For good reporters, it means sources. For some folks, it just means we talked to some people in the media workroom and shot the shit over a beer, and this is what we came up with. But these people are in the industry, so I'll parrot it as information. So I think that gets parroted over and over and over, and it's a bit of a game of broken telephone. That does paint the Blue Jays as that, because it's tough, guys. And I've even grappled with how to frame this and how to write it and how to say it. Because on one hand, yeah, the Blue Jays have pushed $700 million back-to-back off seasons, which would not just be their biggest contract, it would be their biggest contract multiplied by 4 or 5. It's crazy. But they haven't got the guys. So I'm rarely one to hand out trophies for participating or for coming second or third. That doesn't get you anywhere. But it's tough, because if you had have told Blue Jays fans a few years back, listen, Shohei Ohtani and Juan Soto, the Blue Jays are going to be talking into the $600-700 millions of dollars for these guys. If I told Jays fans that back in 2020, they'd say, oh my God, yes, like things must be going well. Sign me up. But when it doesn't work, it just adds to the heartbreak, I think. And it adds to that perception that the Blue Jays come second and third a lot. And frankly, they do. But there was a team that came second on Kevin Gausman, the Mets. There was a team that came second on George Springer, on Hyun-Jin Ryu, on Chris Bassett. I'm sure there was another team trying to trade for Jose Barrios. So it's more complicated than the message that gets out. But I see why that message does get out, and I rarely do I understand the noble reply guy, but I get where they're coming from after a few off seasons where the Jays especially haven't made a big position player splash, which is tough.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the frustration is the lack of moves the last off season and a half outside of the big fish. I think is kind of what gets people frustrated. But you're right. I mean, there's 10, 12, 15 other teams vying for some of these guys. You're not always going to come out on top. I'm going to go completely off track here because of something that you mentioned.
Yeah.
There seems on social media, there seems to be, for lack of a better word, more bullshit than ever as far as fake reports and people that think they know what they're saying. Have you found that's gotten worse, or is that just me far too deep into X?
It's gotten worse, absolutely. And I'm extremely online. I'm very online. It surely doesn't help me, but if something's happened, I've seen it. I'm on way too much. And I see every fake report. I see every idiot trying to do that. It's very strange because I have this job that people pretend to do for free on the internet and on Twitter and suck at. It's a strange thing to grapple with.
Maybe that should make you feel good. I don't know.
I guess. I think so. I'll remind myself of that when I'm standing in like Texas in June complaining about what I've done with my life.
Yeah.
But it's bizarre to me. And then there's another layer to that every offseason of sifting through reports from Latin media as well, trying to understand what is real, what is not. A year ago, that involved some level of trying to sift through Japanese media with Shohei Ohtani, what is real, what is not. In terms of North American, Canadian, and U.S. media, I can kind of have a feel from a quick glance. But when you get outside of the market that I live in day to day, it gets even tougher. And it is frustrating. I don't understand it. There's also an influx of people who have fun with it, and that's fine. But posing as or pretending to have, there always seems to be some radio host from WXYZ Chattanooga who suddenly knows what the Blue Jays are doing. And what happens is that one of these WXYZ Chattanooga hosts will have a tweet that gets 1 million impressions. It gets 500 likes, 500 retweets. So a second idiot will do a similar thing. A third idiot will do a similar thing. It is because for some people, and I understand this, it feels good to have little things go ping, ping, ping on your Twitter account. It feels good to get likes. It feels good to see those little red bubbles. It's bizarre to me. I don't get upset. I'm not clutching my chest. It's I don't work in international politics or medicine. I'm aware that my job is not all that important in the big picture. So we're not costing people's lives here. But when I see it happening every offseason, this one was with, obviously the Red Sox had a big long running one. Last offseason with Ohtani, of course, being a much worse example where you have BBWAA writers misleading people with incorrect reports. That's a problem. But it's tough, and there's an incredible eagerness from people to have sources and be involved in that. It does almost break my heart sometimes when I see someone who is, I can tell, is trying to do it the right way, but is maybe getting a little too eager with it. And it's a very difficult thing to have real sources. They are 500 times more rare than someone following people on Twitter thinks. Um, that is also a game that I have had to. This has been probably one of the biggest changes in my career the last 2, 3 years. I had to make a conscious choice not to play that game. And I'm around this team more than anyone. I'm on the road all the time. I'm in spring training. I got my 42 night reservation confirmation the other day, which is exciting and depressing. I'm around this team a ton. I'm going to stumble into some things, and I'm going to naturally, slowly develop these relationships as it happens. I'm someone who's pretty slow with that. Like if I walk into a room with folks I don't know, I'm anxious. I'm someone who has anxiety in those situations. I am not the classic insider who walks in with a cell phone in each hand saying, "How you doing? How's your kid? Are they 8 this year? Oh, how's your wife?" I don't do that game. It's not normal to me. It's not comfortable to me. So I had to make that decision a few years back to stop playing that game where I'm attempting to get these little nuggets. Because another thing I think that isn't understood from the outside looking in is how much time and effort, often wasted effort, goes into getting just a little morsel of something. And if this was 1978 and getting a story meant I owned it overnight, we wake up in the morning, my newspaper has it and yours doesn't. For a full day, I've whooped your ass. I win. And I hear the old writers tell those stories, and I love it, and it gives me anxiety. But now, am I going to chew up my personal time? Am I going to significantly lessen my own mental health and enjoyment of this job, which is important to me? Finally, I'm realizing. Am I going to do all of that to own something on Twitter for 45 seconds? Probably not. It is a more enjoyable life for me, and I think my coverage ends up better if I do some of that to a certain extent. It's important to still be a reporter, but I can confirm a story and then try to write a better story than you.
Well,
Is my
that's the
jam.
thing. I think Jackson and I have had this conversation. I can't remember one free agent who reported it first on Twitter. Because as soon as someone has it, like you said, 30 seconds later, John Heyman's got it,
Yeah,
Bob has got it. Like, it doesn't really like does it even really matter that much? It's how you cover that story, I find.
yeah. Twitter points have ruined a lot of people's brains, and I've seen this. I tweeted a bit about it, but I've seen it really, really swallow people, and I've seen it be very detrimental to people, how they interact with this job, their own lives, their own health. And when you look at people like, I mean, the great example recently was Adrian Wojnarowski leaving ESPN, and when that happened, you heard people like the Adam Schefters of the world talking about what goes into their job, their amount of screen time, how the phone is on the table at every single dinner. I was obviously nowhere near that, but I could feel myself 2 steps up that road. And it's extremely important to me, which is why I always get comments that I don't have baseball bats and signed balls and stuff in my background. I keep my house baseball free. It doesn't mean I don't love baseball. I love baseball like it's a person sitting right at the bar next to me. It's a living, breathing person to me. But I can't have it there all the time, or else that'll kill me. And that's almost where I got a few years back. It was too present because when you're chasing stuff like that, it completely consumes you. And as we see a little more openly in the NBA, a lot of it is playing the agent game as well. Now, in the NBA, people are shameless. It is this guy signs an extension that was negotiated by Matt McDonald of Performance Sports. I'm like, well, congrats, Matt. Good job. Way to send the text. But it's a very strange game, and I love the other side of the game, which is the story that happens after everybody's puked it up on Twitter.
Yeah, and I think personally think that's the most important part.
Yeah.
I guess I want to touch on Juan Soto. I think we have to. I don't want to talk too much about it,
Okay.
but you probably might not even been at the winter meetings when that was finalized because I think that was Sunday night. Were you there?
Yep.
You were
I had
there?
landed in Dallas, and thank God I had taken a connecting flight and I was tired, so I said no to drinks that evening. That would have been a tough one, but because over the years there have been a few poorly timed transactions, let's say. But I was sitting back at the hotel room, and it lined up from my own selfish standpoint just perfectly. Set the table for the week. I knew what the story for the next couple of days would be, but that's Sunday night, and let's not pretend I knew 765 was coming. No, going into the offseason, I would have said 575 to 600. I think that's where it would have been. I mean, Scott Boras, do your damn thing. That was that was a dream scenario for an agent, because not only do you have eager younger brothers, meaning the Blue Jays and the Red Sox, maybe some other teams, and then you have pride, which is New York versus New York. That's a dream negotiation for those people involved. They nailed it. Man, what a number.
People aren't going to be happy to just call the Jays the eager younger brother, but
hey,
it's
it's a tough life back
how
where they are
close
now.
do you think the Jays were to that 765, and like how realistic were they in this pursuit?
The sense I got was that the Blue Jays offer would have involved some level of deferred money, which is becoming, the popular new thing. Not brand new by any means, but at this level certainly is. And when I compare it to Ohtani and that pursuit from last year, what I've heard people in the Blue Jays organization say so often was that, like, listen, we knew that the Dodgers were likely for Shohei, but we were going to do everything possible to be right there in case something slipped. And that's a bit of the same sense I get in this. Now, one part of me says, is that a loser's mentality? Like, do the Yankees and Dodgers ever think like that? No, they don't need to. But I also understand where it's coming from. And from the very beginning, I thought that this was likeliest a New York thing. And from the very beginning, I think I wrote this in a couple of places. Like, I'm never going to bet against Steve Cohen saying, screw it. Like, I want this guy. Like, that guy owns pieces of art that cost more than some organizations. He's going to get what he wants, no matter what. And even though that always felt obvious, I think the Blue Jays had to position themselves as a team that made them think about it, that were at least involved. And you never know how particular a player will be. You never know what will matter to a player, because when we talk about these types of players, great players in other sports, whether it's the LeBrons, the Tom Brady's, a lot of the time, the guys at the tops of these sports are a little quirky. They have some interesting wants and needs and things that they obsess and focus over. You never know when you're going to strike the right chord with a guy. And even if you know you're fighting uphill, you've got to go in on this. This is Juan Soto. That was Shohei Ohtani. These things don't happen all that often. And for Blue Jays fans, it sucks, because it's adds to the heartbreak once you actually believe it could happen, because the Jays get thrown around as a team. Oh, maybe they have this, maybe they have that. And for it not to happen 2 years in a row, that's a tough pill. And now they need to do more than they did last year when they tried to rebound from Shohei.
Winter and snow in Canada usually means no baseball for a while. But thankfully, the Baseball Zone has you covered during the holiday season, because their 2024 Snowball Baseball Camp is here. For those aged 5 to 13, it's a great way to spend some time out of the house, having fun and learning something. The Snowball Camp includes thorough baseball instruction in all areas, great camaraderie and competition, home run derbies and other games, a TBZ t-shirt, and a bonus daily day pass for extra work and fun after the camp if you haven't already had enough. It runs December 27th through the 30th and January 2nd and 3rd. You can pick and choose which day you'd like to attend. Space is limited, so sign up early for the 2024 Snowball Winter Baseball Camp at thebaseballzone.ca.
Well, I mean, let's talk about what they did do, I guess, at the winter meetings. And a good segue to that, the Andres Jimenez deal and for Spencer Horwitz. What do you mean? That screams run prevention, obviously, the two words that Blue Jays Blue Jays fans hate most at this point. But what do you make of that trade? Jimenez had a very good offensive year in 2022. He's been down the last 2 years, but obviously, elite defender. What do you kind of make of what the Jays did there?
Incredibly Jays. If you had have given me 100 guesses, their first move of the winter meetings, I would not have said Andres Jimenez. Like, this guy's 2 years into his final 7 years. He's got 5 years left in this deal. Like, that's never who you think of. Speaking to some folks who are around the Guardians and cover them, like that wasn't what they thought was about to happen. It wasn't obvious. It feels like the Blue Jays are trying to win every game 1-0, which is tough, man. I can just picture myself standing somewhere in June or July this year asking Chris Bassett about a 1-0 loss in which he threw 7 great innings, and he's looking at me like, man, it's like, there were a few of those last year. And if you want to play the pitching and defense game, I always say you've got to play perfect baseball. There's no room for error. If you're the 2021 Blue Jays, you can screw up 5 things, but then hit a grand slam and win a baseball game. Neither way is inherently better or worse, but boy, if you play this pitching and defense game, you got to be good at it. And it's a tough one. And in Jimenez, as a player, I love the player individually. Obviously, he's an incredible defender, a very good base runner, which the Blue Jays are talking about in an extreme amount, like to the point where it's not just off-season eyewash. Like they're obviously attempting to make this a better base running team. He fits all of that. Now, his offense is the question. It's infield Dalton Varsho. He's Dalton Varsho, which can be a very good thing. It makes you an elite defender, Gold Glove favorite maybe. But his bat is going to be the difference between being a very good player and a great player, a player who raises the ceiling of this team. Now, the Blue Jays are optimistic that they can get him back to who he was a couple of years ago, because of course they are. From the Guardians side of this, yeah, there's financial components, but the Guardians are probably also looking at this saying, man, if he OPS is 650 again this year, like we can't trade this guy. And I liked what the Guardians did, turning around and flipping Horwitz to Pittsburgh. I thought Horwitz was such a Cleveland-y player. Like, he seemed to fit them so much. I guess he fits Pittsburgh as well. I hope he has a great time in Pittsburgh. Wonderful dude to cover, Spencer Horwitz, and a fun player too. But it's interesting. It's interesting, man. I think Jimenez is obviously the shortstop next year. Sorry, 2026 and beyond. Ross Atkins, a couple of times speaking with us, made it very clear we're trading for him as a second baseman, which makes me ask, okay, why are you saying that? It's you have to play the game the right way. Bo is the shortstop. That's how this looks right now. But a year from now, which is not even much of an if Bo Bichette is elsewhere after this season, you slide Jimenez over, and I think you're pretty happy with that for 4 or 5 years. It's a great defensive option there. They need to do a ton more, because moving this just in the direction of more run prevention, no. There needs to be more that comes with this. And if they do upgrade the offense, then you look back at Jimenez and say, hell yeah, that's a great move. But man, more's got to happen.
Did Horwitz kind of get squeezed out here? Not, Vladdy's off first, and not quite a second baseman, and the influx of infielders that this organization has. Was that kind of the logical choice in your mind? Like, did you see, obviously something was going to happen with some of these infielders, but did you see him kind of as the one?
Yeah, I thought it would either be Horwitz due to a bit of a squeeze, Barger because of another team falling in love with his physical tools, or Leo Jimenez, who's been asked about a lot over the years in trades because he can play a shortstop. Anybody who can play a real shortstop and hit a bit is going to get asked about. But Spencer Horwitz felt like the most likely. And I don't mean this in a way detrimental to Horwitz whatsoever, but I think going to a smaller market team like a Pittsburgh that's not spending a ton is really good for him, because he's going to get to play 150 games, most likely, because there's not, there aren't big expensive bats they're trying to wedge in or DH around him or anything. Like, he can just go play. And I think Spencer Horwitz, over the course of a season, hitting in Pittsburgh will be friendly for him. I think he'll be back with Matt Haig, which is great for him. He's the guy that'll put up that 360, 375 on base percentage. And I've always said about Horwitz that he needs to be appreciated over a full season. If you bring him up for a week, you might look back and see he's got a 400 on base, but it's not going to be all that exciting. Over the course of a full season, though, I think the normal stats and the nerd stats are going to like him. And good for him to get a fresh start there, but he's always been on that fringe, kind of tied to Vladdy. He looked better than I thought at second base, honestly. Like, it wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible whatsoever. I was kind of impressed there, so I think he's got a good opportunity there. I really do.
a big part of this offseason now, it feels like, as Soto has signed, the Jimenez trade has happened. Corbin Burns, where is he going
Yeah.
to go? There's been a lot of smoke around that with the Jays in San Francisco. What are you hearing there, and what's your sense on kind of how that's going to shake out?
Yeah, speaking of fake reports, that's a big that's a big one. Corbin Burns, from the start of the offseason, has made more sense for the Blue Jays to me than Max Fried did. Both exceptional pitchers. But when you look at what the Blue Jays really like, and when I started covering this front office 7, 8, 9 years ago, and you'd hear them say, we like athletic pitchers, we like durability, I'd say, okay, cool, everybody does. But I've heard that so many thousands of times now, and I've seen the type of pitchers they acquire, like Gausman and Barrios and Bassett just being such good examples of that. I think Burns fits that pretty damn well. And he also makes sense for them, and this goes for any long-term player, because he extends the window of that rotation. When you look at the starting rotation, Bassett's going into his last year. Jose Barrios has an opt-out 2 years from now, and if he keeps pitching like this, and if this market keeps going like this, go cash in. And Kevin Gausman has 2 years left. Bowden Francis looked incredible to end last year. Yariel Rodriguez has potential, but are both of them going to work out long-term? I don't know. The Blue Jays need to extend that window of this rotation a bit. Corbin Burns makes a ton of sense. And I think this is a good example, guys, of what gets me to the budget part for the Blue Jays. The word budget doesn't mean anything anymore. I don't know what the Blue Jays budget is, and I don't think there really is one. Because if you can make a brand new budget for a Soto, for an Ohtani, you can do that for Burns too. If you're viewing players as individual business cases, yeah. And what that player would mean to your competitiveness down the road, ticket sales, yada, yada. I don't really look at this and say, because it's one of the most common questions I get of, how much do the Blue Jays have? Do they have 20? Do they have 30? Do they have 40? It's a guess. It's a complete guess at this point, because I think that number can change. And I think Burns is, oh my God, look at the track record. Like, if you want to make another signing that's going to age well, because Gosman's aged well, Barrios has aged pretty well. Like, they're nailing these starting pitcher signings. Burns looks like that, man. It's just, I think, pretty dependent on how high the Giants want to go, because the Blue Jays definitely like him, and I think are certainly in on him.
Yeah, and that's funny you say that about the budget, because Jackson and I were just talking about before you hopped on here. Does that CBT threshold really mean anything to a company like Rogers that owns the Blue Jays, that owns the network they play on? They're jumping in on MLSE. Like, is that really paying a little bit of tax on whatever you go with that? Is that really a hindering factor for them?
Shouldn't be. I mean, when you look at the spending capability of Rogers Communications versus a lot of owners in this league, it shouldn't be. And Blue Jays ownership has always been such a tricky thing to discuss, because you don't have a face. Yes, you have Edward Rogers, but you don't have. It's not your classic, zany old rich guy who you can look at and point to and, my goodness, maybe talk to. I've never. This is almost 10 years covering this team. I've never talked to anyone at ownership level. But
you never had a one-on-one with Edward Rogers?
Not quite. No, my invitations must have been lost in the mail. Maybe we'll grab some beers in January. But when you look at what Rogers Media is capable of, it should rival any team in baseball, quite frankly. Now, when you get into boards of directors and shareholders and everything, that gets complicated. But a few $1,000,000 here and there on a tax shouldn't kill them. Now, that was a priority, getting back under that tax towards the end of last year and trying to reset themselves a bit, which should help. I think right now, my biggest curiosity, and it's not something teams will ever tell you at this point, but how are ticket sales going? And I don't know if the answer would be a resounding sellout at this point. I often got that question going through last year, like, when are fans going to stop showing up, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't happen within the season, especially for a market like the Blue Jays. Like, I grew up planning family trips to go see the Blue Jays once a year. People come in. These are not all folks who live in my building here within eyesight of the Rogers Center. A lot of those tickets are bought in February, March, April, when things are still going well. You saw a bit of a taper off of attendance, but nothing crazy. I think that next year will really tell you something. And maybe it's not all that bad. We'll see. But it could be more noticeable, especially when you get into a Tuesday versus the Rays in April type of thing. That is that 25,000 crowd still there, or do we start seeing the 16s and 17s? I think that is a massive part of this, and I think it's obviously impacted them. The Blue Jays are not in better shape right now than they were at this time last year, because ticket sales I don't think could be the same, and that impacts a lot of this.
Speaking of things that hinder, I don't want to talk about board of directors and all that boring stuff, but things that do hinder the offseason. How much does roster and to a lesser extent front office instability play into some of this? I mean, does Corbin Burns look at this and say, Vladdy's not signed long term, Bo's not signed long term, this front office has been scrutinized? That's probably, I'm guessing, less to a lesser extent. But as far as the roster goes, does that money's going to talk at the end of the day? Like, we'll be honest, but how much does the roster potential turnover impact things?
It has to, because in most of these negotiations, the final offers end up pretty close. If somebody signs Corbin Burns for 8 years, $250, second place offer isn't going to be $120. The offers get to a pretty similar place. And if fans remove the Toronto fandom from all of this, and I guess that's kind of my job to not care about who's winning or losing, but when you look at the Blue Jays right now, they're coming off a 74-win season, and Vladdy and Bo might be gone in a year, and the good veteran pitchers might be gone in a year or two. Like, is this going to reset, or will you go through a downturn? And if you're Corbin Burns, you want to win. Yeah, you want to get paid. Number one. That always wins. I don't care where a player's from or if they're best friends on the team. Doesn't matter. Money. But if and when, usually when the money is close, you want to win. Like, a lot of these guys are 7-8 years into their careers. They're sick of getting bounced from the playoffs in the first round or falling short. And this applies to Burns. I'd also maybe even look at like mid-level guys. I'm thinking Anthony Santander, for example. In 2026, if I'm Anthony Santander, I'm asking the Blue Jays, in a year, in 2026, am I still going to have Vladdy hitting behind me and another star in this lineup? Or am I going to kind of turn into the new Randall Grichuk, like the one guy that's getting paid in this lineup, but it's obviously a transition, and maybe I'm going to get traded in a couple years, like kind of that awkward 2018-19 middle ground. Nobody wants to be that, and the Blue Jays can't afford to lose out on that. I don't think the Toronto thing is not as big and present of an issue as it's made out to be by a lot of folks. But the Blue Jays, they need to tie when it comes to geography. They're not going to beat New York, but as long as that becomes a non-issue, that's good. But they can't take a big L in any of these other categories. And right now, they're kind of taking a big L in how this team looks right now for the next couple of years. It doesn't stack up against New York or LA or the Mets right now. That's where this gets dangerous. And even a team like Boston can point to their farm system and say, hey, Raffy Devers is here right now, and this kid will be here a year from now. Toronto can't really do that either. It's tough.
That's what has me thinking, and obviously they can, so I don't want to sound, but can they reset this thing without signing Vladdy? Or is it heading towards falling off a cliff and a full-blown rebuild? Because there's to a lesser extent Bo. It just seems like Vladdy is the answer to extending the window.
Vladdy fixes everything. Absolutely everything. If they were to extend Vladdy tomorrow, yeah, it's good. Baseball, Vladdy's good at baseball. Cool, that takes care of a power-hitting first baseman for the next decade. More importantly, it signals that this front office is going to keep spending at this level for a decade. Because if you extend Vladdy and don't build him around it, you're out of your mind. Sell the team at that point, no matter who you are and what market. But they wouldn't do that. If they extended Vladdy, you're committing to building around him and trying to do this a while longer. And while the results haven't been there, kind of getting back, guys, to what we were talking about earlier with like these $700 million offers that don't work out, while the results haven't been there, I'm also hesitant to knock ownership too much because they're spending. And
They're
they
swinging.
haven't even screwed up a lot of the spending either. I know that George Springer's last years aren't exactly what you wanted. Ideally, at this time, he would have had a ring. But when you look at their big deals, they don't have that contract you're looking at right now and saying, oh my God, like, do we just cut the guy? They don't have an Anthony Rendon or something like that, you know? And again, if go back to 2018, if I told you the Blue Jays are going to be spending 200 and X million bucks a year, everybody is saying, sign me up. But they need to keep that going because there is very, very, very clearly an off-ramp they can take in a year. And Vladdy solves all of that because he is not only a good player, he is a franchise player. And there are not 30 of those in baseball. I think that's something I've come to appreciate more over the years is how rare a true franchise player is. It doesn't just mean the best player on your team. There's a lot of guys in cities who are the best player on their team, but they're not interested in that, in embracing that. That's fine. That's totally okay. But Vladdy loves the city. He loves the team. He has the name brand value. Even if your team sucks, he can be what, for me growing up, was Carlos Delgado or Roy Halladay, a reason to watch a baseball game, even if the team is stuck in the middle. And that connection is so important. And when I look a year down the line, and I bet you Vladdy's looking a year down the line right now and saying, hell yeah, like he's the biggest fan of free agency ever. But if the Blue Jays lose Vladdy, this gets ugly. Because with that, you lose casual fans. And by casual fans, I mean a majority of the fans. I'm so inside the baseball bubble and day-to-day stuff that sometimes I fall into the mistake of thinking that everybody's a hardcore into the numbers, blah, blah. No, the average baseball fan is my mom. It's your buddy. It's your uncle who like to watch a game. They know a few players, and damn it, do they know Vladdy. They love Vladdy. They will go to the ballpark, buy a $180 jersey and 7 $21 beers because they're going to go see Vladdy. It doesn't matter if they're watching a 7-14 team in late April. It's such a dangerous game the Blue Jays are in now, and I don't think there's a perfect answer. It's and rarely is there a perfect answer in these extension candidates because you can see it from one side or the other why it doesn't happen. But man, going back to how we started this, like if you find a way to extend Vladdy, or if you do the Aaron Judge, let him go to free agency, test it, bring him back, that completely resets all of this. And I think it wins back a lot of fans who have had their patience tested for a few years now.
Yeah, and then obviously that leads kind of to my next question is, could you see a scenario where Vladdy signs, say, before spring training during the season? My only reason I can see that happening, him not testing the mark, is he's had some ups and downs in his career, right? That MVP caliber season isn't necessarily guaranteed. So what percentage would you say the chance of him re-signing before hitting free agency? Because from the outside looking in, it looks like there's no chance. Why wouldn't he test the market?
But less than 5.
Really?
At this point, I think Soto has moved the market too. Vladdy and Soto, they're not the same players. Neither is Ohtani. But once Major League Baseball starts getting comfortable having these conversations at these levels, and we're seeing prices move up all over the place. Max Fried, that's the biggest deal guaranteed for a lefty, for example. We're even seeing a lot of pitchers on 1 and 2 year deals getting a little more cash than you'd think. It's something that we see in every league. I think, the NHL is just stuck at the same boring pay scale as it always is. But the NBA kind of had this big jump in recent years over the past decade into where everyone's getting paid now, and the big guys are getting paid. Baseball is not going to be that jarring, but once we start normalizing conversations above $300 million, if you're Vladdy, you're hitting free agency at 26. I mean, that's got to be beautiful for you. And for Vladdy to say no to that idea right now would take an extremely aggressive move from the Blue Jays that is not just based in baseball, but based a bit in emotion. And I do not think that's how this front office works.
No, that's not how they've operated.
No, That said, I think that a move with a touch of emotion to it is extremely important because there comes a point in all of these things, maybe a little bit with Ohtani, certainly with Soto, where Steve Cohen said, "Screw it! Like I'm getting this guy. This is my guy. I'm going to go get him." You see this from GMs around the league. I'm always hesitant to use the Alex Anthopoulos example because I know people get a little wired about that here in Toronto, but he's a good example. Dave Dombrowski with the Phillies is another good example of knowing when there's a time that, okay, even if the numbers don't add up perfectly, screw it. What we're doing ain't working. We've got to stretch out and make a move with the heart a little bit involved in this. And that's not anti-analytics. That's not anti-projections. It's just I think there needs to be an inch of space for emotion and context of where you're at in the world to creep in here. But I don't know if that's exactly the Blue Jays' comfort zone. I think they are. I think they understand very much what they think Vladdy is worth. And if them and Vladdy agreed right now, he'd be extended. They obviously don't agree right now. And for Vladdy to pass up a chance at free agency, they'd have to offer him the world. They'd have to give him a stake in ownership and $500 million right now. And I don't see that happening first. And yeah, there's some risk involved. I mean, look at last year. This time last year, I would have said Bo Bichette's a sure thing. I don't really know who Vladdy is. And now it's completely opposite. But I think they'll both have pretty good years because it's a couple $100 million can really motivate a fella, I've heard. So
550 million and a free phone plan from Roger. So
there you go. Thank God. I'm turning it down. I'm a proud Bell man. I can't. I consider it a journalistic issue. I can't be out here supporting ownership.
I wanted to ask you, Keegan, about player development, right? Whether they sign Vladdy or not, player development will be of huge importance, right? Whether you have these big contracts where you're going to need some young guys to come up and outperform their value. Lots of talk about player development with the Jays this past season, last couple of years. We also heard there were lots of changes after the season. From your perspective, what have you seen, these changes? Can you speak to them a little bit and maybe just the organization's perspective, I guess, on development and how they're going to try to change things up moving forward?
They need to develop some stars. It's great to develop Spencer Horwitz, Addison Barger, Davis Schneider, or Elvis Martinez, Leo Jimenez, on and on and on. One of these guys has got to pop because your front office should be able to find the guys that fill in his depth. The Blue Jays point to those players as development success stories, and I agree. But on top of that, there needs to be another level. All of them, for individual reasons, are development success stories, but you need the next Vladdy. You need the next Bo Bichette because the Orioles are coming with 5 more who probably look the same as the rest of them. It's a little creepy what they're doing over there. You've got the Red Sox coming with their own gaggle of top prospects that are scary. You need to develop a couple of stars along the way. It's so important to raise the ceiling. The Blue Jays right now are raising the floor. The floor gets you to the playoffs. The ceiling helps you win in the playoffs. It's obvious what's missing. Now, they've had some incredible upside pitching, like Ricky Tiedemann. How will he come back? We'll see. It's going to be a long time until I see someone as physically gifted as Ricky Tiedemann. It breathtaking to watch him throw a bullpen in spring training. But how far can the human body be pushed? I think he's testing that question. I'd love to see him come back and pitch healthy, but we'll see. And Orelvis Martinez had flashes of being that for a while, but boom, popped 80 games. That doesn't help you. He has to come back and prove himself now. Arjun Namala has a lot of upside. Really like the player, really like the young man, but that's 3 or 4 years down the road. You see some more of these prospects coming, like Alan Roden, who I think is going to start getting a ton more attention here very soon. Josh Kasevich, who the Blue Jays bring up every sentence. But again, in both cases, are they more part of that kind of Leo Jimenez, Davis Schneider kind of group that is good but doesn't raise the ceiling? We'll see. They need to do a lot more because that was what this front office came to town touting as being important. And that's how you win. It applies. The last thing I'll say on it, it applies financially too, because right now what you are seeing is a Blue Jays team that needs to go out and buy on the open market to fix their problems. If they had already developed, let's say, if they had already developed a guy who can step in left field, I know the Blue Jays developing an outfielder is it's a bit abstract here, but if they had already developed a really good left fielder who could step in, then that saves you the $20 million you might spend on Anthony Santander, and you can put that somewhere else. It's like having a rookie quarterback in the NFL. For 4 years, you can do anything, right? And that really worked for them with Vladdy, with Bo. That's where Hyun-Jin Ryu, that's where George Springer, Gosman, that's where all that money came from early, because you had a guy playing like an MVP making $1 million. That's a cheat code in Major League Baseball. I don't know if they have that coming up, so they would need to be paying for stars on top of it. That's tough, man. You need a few of your own stars.
I guess to kind of wrap up here, and on that note, do you foresee a big splash coming in free agency, based on what you've heard? Can you see a Burns or Santander or a Christian Walker or Pete Alonso, maybe less so Pete Alonso?
Can certainly see it. Absolutely. The Blue Jays, and it's I think people are still slow coming around to the idea, but like the Blue Jays have a lot of cash. They're trying to spend it, right? They're going to be in on those. I can certainly see it happening. Burns, of course, there is interest there. From what I hear, I think they would lean more towards pursuing Santander than Teoscar Hernandez. Love Teo, loved covering him. I wish I was as relaxed and carefree as him in life. It seems like a good time, but it's Santander does seem to fit the profile they want of that side of the plate, that flexibility, but also making a bit more contact along with his power. And looking down the list, I mean, I love the Pete Alonso idea because I'm a sucker for Pete Alonso. I think Walker is going to be like one of the better signings of the offseason wherever he goes. It almost makes you wish that Vladdy could slide around and play some third base, but I do think they have it in them. They have the money. If they don't make a big splash, expensive signing, it's by choice, I think, not by financial restriction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to wrap it up by saying the same thing I said to Ben Nicholson-Smith when he was on pre-winter meetings. I don't think we solved anything today, but it was still a great conversation.
There we go. I like it. We'll solve things eventually. We'll get all this figured out. You know, it's we should record some snippets, of me predicting every single player signing right now, and we can snip in what eventually happens here.
I already heard Corbin Burns, 8 years, 250, Christian Walker and Vladdy going to third. So that's what I'm taking away from
Absolutely. Sign me up. I would probably sign Vladdy up too. A little third base might turn that 500 into 520 mil next offseason.
And I think that phone plan, maybe throwing a free TV package, you might get Vladdy too. Who knows?
Why not? Some Ignite TV. I hate that I even know that. I work in a building with too many advertisements in it.
Yeah, the Ignite TV that skips half the time and freezes, and then I want to put the remote to the TV. But that Ignite. Anyways, Keegan, this was a lot of fun. We really appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll have you on again for your record 5th appearance.
I love it. The record setter. We'll talk again soon. I think I've got, December 16th. It's got to be getting close to 50 days until I go down to beautiful Dunedin, Florida.
Maybe we'll talk to you again when you're nice and sweaty standing at the backfield watching.
Absolutely sunburned. I love it.
Sounds good. Thanks, Keegan.
You got it, guys.
Well, another great interview with lots of insight from Keegan, touching on a wide variety of things, from how sources are developed, this junk you see on social media, to what the Blue Jays could potentially do for the remainder of the offseason.
Yeah, I love to chat about sources. I think that shined light on something that you asked a good question, Matt. Like, that has increased, like the amount of fake reports and BS out there, as you said. Like, I'm glad you touched on that because I've noticed it too. And it's something that has happened in sort of sports journalism, but baseball journalism especially recently, right? With the Ohtani stuff too, right? With the BBWAA members, those two reporters with their incorrect reports. I think it's hard, as he said, to collect sources, right? To cultivate sources. It's something that doesn't just happen. And I loved his reference about the whole, talking to someone over a beer or whatever is very different than a journalist cultivating sources. And I really appreciated that, because that's something that I don't think a lot of people really think about too much. Regarding the baseball team itself, I mean, one thing that stuck out to me was the Vlad extension. He doesn't sound very confident. He sounds like he thinks it's gonna go a lot more like the Aaron Judge route, right? If it's gonna happen at all at this point. And if you're a Jays fan, that can't sound good. That should make you probably pretty concerned. And like Matt, I mean, just looking at the state of this Jays team, you can understand why a free agent like Corbin Burnes or Anthony Santander doesn't want to become the next Randall Grichuk, because that is not fun.
Well, and that's why I asked that question, because you hear that a lot. Like, if I'm Corbin Burnes, obviously, as we talked about, money talks in the end. I mean, if you blow everybody out of the water, you're probably getting the fish. But how is that not a question? Like Keegan said, like if you're Anthony Santander or Corbin Burnes or Christian Walker, Pete Alonso, or anybody left on the market looking to sign a 5 to 10 year deal, depending on who it is, how's your question not who's going to be hitting behind me or who's going to be supplying the offense? So I think that's a huge thing this offseason for the Blue Jays, and it just doesn't seem like they've been eager to address that with Vladdy, which continues to puzzle me.
It's crazy, and it's something that like fans have been like every single fan, as he said, every single Jays fan would be thrilled if they signed Vladdy. You know what I mean? Like it is a slam dunk. I think too, Matt. Like if they announce something, let's say they somehow do get it done in spring training before the start of the season, I would love to see what that does to the opinion of the front office amongst Jays fans, right? I would love to see that. And Edward Rogers himself. I think that it's very interesting what's happening this offseason, and how is this offseason, is it going to replicate the feelings from last year? There are so many more good free agents out there, right? There are no excuses this year. Now, we've already seen them be active, right? We have seen they are doing things. Signed Garcia. They made the Jimenez deal. We'll see what's next. But they are in a very, very dangerous territory here on a big scale, Matt. And that is something that I did take away from that interview as well.
Absolutely. I think if they sign Vladdy and do nothing else this offseason, it would still change slightly the opinion of this front office, because it opens the window. If you sign Vladdy for 12 years, like Keegan said, you're committing to spending on this team going down the road, even if it's not next year, even if they finish 500 next year, you have Vladdy locked up for years to come. You're probably going to spend next offseason or make trades that push you towards being a contender. But like you said, this thing is headed for a cliff if they don't re-sign Vladdy and to a lesser extent Bo here, because there's not much coming in the system. There's not much surrounding those guys offensively. So it could get real ugly here in 2026.
At the very least, if they do that, at the very least, he is Carlos Delgado. But at the very most, he has his Bautista moment in the postseason, and maybe even a Joe Carter moment, right? Because even in the down years, like he said, I remember growing up watching Bautista in those lean years. He's still hitting bing bongs out of the park. That was awesome to see, even though no one was there. And he completely hit the nail on the head there. If they lose Vlad, they lose a lot of casual fans.
Yeah, it's certainly the fork in the road of all fork in the roads for this franchise. But I guess fortunately we don't have anything to do about it. All we get to do is continue to have great guests on this podcast. We have Cleveland Guardians reliever Cade Smith coming up in an episode shortly, and some big plans for college baseball fans come January. So that's a wrap for a conversation with Keegan, but we will be sure to be back shortly. Until then, take care.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to check out Canadian Baseball Network for extensive and comprehensive coverage of the latest in Canadian baseball. And The Baseball Zone, Canada's leading instructional baseball academy and training home to thousands of MLB pro, college, and youth baseball players.